Some animals have similar characteristics, such as the house cat could be similar to a tiger. However, a house cat is obviously not the exact same species as a wild tiger, as cool as that would be. The closest evolutionary kin to humans would be the great apes. The unfortunate part of this is that the great apes are also facing a possible extinction, and we will then lose our closest kin, kind of how house cats are going, could possibly lose one of their closest kins. Great apes can do things like remember long number sequences even longer than what humans can remember. They can communicate with sign language, and they learn how to use things like tools such as sticks and rocks. The book Planet Without Apes by Craig Stanford discusses the current causes that could lead to the possible extinction of all of the great apes. The 4 types of the great apes. There are 4 types of great apes. The one that's most commonly known would be the chimpanzees, since these were the ones studied by Jane Goodall, and they normally live in groups of only about 2 or 3, and they do eat small mammals as well as plants. Gorillas are the second type of great ape. They are very large, however they're a little bit more of a shy ape. They live in the groups of about 1 to 2 dozen, with anywhere from 1 to 2, depending on the group size. Silverbacks, which are the largest male of the group in charge of the entire community. Bonobos are not as much as known about these, because they live in the Congo Basin of Central Africa, so it's harder to get to them. They're just to learn about their research. And the 4th, orangutans, live in the Indonesian forests, and they live primarily alone. However, it has been recently decided that they don't live alone because they want to, more because of environmental constraints. For example, if there is enough fruit in an area, then orangutans will congregate and be in a group to eat the fruit. Common characteristics of the great apes are that they reproduce slowly. They might only reproduce 1 young in about every 5 years. They all have a rotating shoulder, and they don't have tails. The author, Craig Stanford, begins the rest of his book by explaining that protecting the species as a whole is better for their welfare and the biodiversity of the species, which is more important than protecting any one individual of the species. His causes for extinction start with the deforestation of their homes. For example, even though they might live on sanctuaries that have been set aside for the government, the laws of the sanctuaries aren't necessarily kept, and locals commonly deforest the areas anyways for use of local firewood. Because of deforestation, the human populations moving into their ape territory, there's a slightly more isolated gene pool, and there is a lower chance for genetic diversity. For example, female chimpanzees, once they reach a mature age, used to leave their home community and leave to find other communities, eventually settling on their chosen home community, which helped promote diversity among all of the chimpanzees in the area. However, now, because of humans, chimpanzees are not as likely to travel around and reach other communities, which could result eventually in inbreeding. Forests produce some valuable resources. There is oil under the forest, and they produce timber, which right now is being lumbered at a rate that is unsustainable for the rainforests. China, because of environmental reasons in their own country, has decided that it is okay to exploit the poorer African nations for the rainforest for use of the timber and wood, as well as promoting oil palm plantations in Indonesia, which involves cutting down the rainforest to plant new plantations. This could be sustainable if we applied a conservation effort and made the fallow land of the rainforest usable, or another option would be sustainable logging through selective logging if the trees in an area are logged, if the trees that are logged in the area are not a valuable food source. Because orangutans are specialists, meaning that they require the specific resources in the specific environment they live in, it is much harder for them to thrive with the rapid changes in the deforestation of their homeland. As the forests are cut, great apes venture into the farms and plantations that are planted, which gives them a very bad reputation with the locals and farmers because the meetings of apes and farmers usually end with one of them ending up not so happy. And for example, a farmer might have a piece bit out of him, which means that the locals in the area do not promote the welfare of the apes. Another reason for the extinction of the apes would be the black market for bush meat. Bush meat is meat hunted from wild animals, and a popular bush meat on the black market is gorilla meat. Gorilla meat is costly, and gorillas are hunted and hunted and hunted. As migrants move around the world, they bring their taste buds with them, calling for the illegal outsourcing of bush meat. Gorilla hunting used to be a cultural experience for local community members, where the native men would go out and risk their lives to battle a giant gorilla and possibly bring home the gorilla meat to their community and family. Now the locals have the unfair advantage because they use guns and they don't hunt just meat for their family or community, but they hunt meat to sell it for the black market, which means they hunt as much as possible to make more money. Also, a downside to hunting is that traps that are set, not even necessarily for the great apes, used to be made out of rope, where the great apes themselves could actually free themselves by using their hands and fingers to get out of the rope. However, now the traps are being made out of metal, which cut into the flesh, and actually about 1/3 of Ugandan chimpanzees are either amputated or mutilated from the metal traps. Bushmeat in general is dangerous even just to eat because of the bacteria and unsterile handling of the bushmeat on the black market, and the solution would be obvious: stop eating black market bushmeat. However, that's much easier said than done. Another reason for the extinction of the apes that isn't quite as commonly known as deforestation would be diseases. Great apes can get diseases such as Ebola, influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis. These probably all sound really familiar. That's because humans can get these too. A lot of diseases that are human related can also be caught by chimpanzees, which means people bring diseases to the great apes, much like the missionaries did to the Native Americans many years ago, causing massive population decline in the Native Americans. This means that researchers that in Africa that do get to research the great apes have to very much limit their contact or risk exposure of any carried diseases to the great apes. So even though researchers have to limit their contact, the great ape population is still declining. One example of a virus switching from apes to humans would be AIDS, which started in apes as SIV, the simian immunodeficiency virus, and transferred to humans as HIV. This is probably because of improperly handled bushmeat, or maybe someone took an infested ape home as a home pet. We can't rely on zoos or research centers to carry on a species. This is because apes are intelligent and they require their normal habitat and community to meet their social needs. For example, being cooped up in a house all day might give us Wisconsinites over winter a cabin fever feeling. Apes are too intelligent to be kept in a small, cooped up space. Another thing is that zoos have to have enough funding. There are often zoos that just don't make enough money to properly handle apes, and so they do get stuck in cages and maybe aren't out in their habitat as often as they should be because zoos just don't have the money to upkeep that kind of habitat. Fewer apes means that there is less biodiversity and a higher chance for inbreeding. If it came down to the only apes that are left are in zoos, then it does mean that eventually, generations down, there is a higher risk for inbreeding, which still would lead to the eventual extinction of apes. They don't breed fast enough for a captive breeding program because something like a rabbit might make many, many young in a time span of 1 year. An ape might only make one young in a time span of about 5 years, which doesn't make them likely candidates for captive breeding programs. Ecotourism is something that also could be seen as helping the apes. However, it's a very it can't necessarily be relied on because of the fragile political environment of the African countries like Rwanda where the ecotourism takes place. Ecotourism is positive because it A, protects the habitat of the great apes, and especially the mountain gorillas where the entire habitat and all of the species in the habitat are protected as well as the apes. Ecotourism also brings money to the local community because of tourism. However, it's negative because apes have to get used to the people through habituation, and because more people are coming in from the tourism, this also means that there's a higher risk for disease transfer. The extinction of apes would also bring the extinction of the ape culture. Ape culture is something that has been developed. For example, chimps of the same gene makeup, chimps in one area might prefer to eat pigs, and chimps in another area might prefer to not eat pigs. And this isn't necessarily because of environmental factors. If both areas have pigs, that's not an environmental factor. That's a learned habit that one community would pass down and the other community just never learned and didn't. Losing apes would also lose their primitive developed culture and the insight to the development that took the apes centuries to build. I thought overall that the book was very well organized, and I appreciated this, and especially since there wasn't too much scientific language in it, which I thought was a positive thing for the book because that meant that the overall message could be read and understood by a majority of the population. One thing I learned is that I wasn't aware that especially China and foreign countries had such a role in the deforestation of the tropical rainforests, and I guess I didn't understand the full extent of the deforestation before I read this book. In my conclusion, I do recommend this book for reading by others, and I would like to end by how the author ended the book, which is to note that we can't save the apes if we can't work towards changing our own choices as humans, because using his last few words of the book, their future is very much our own.